Buongiorno a tutte, benvenuti e grazie per essere qui. Inauguriamo questa seconda giornata di festival qui a Palazzo della Ragione con uno degli eventi per noi più attesi. E abbiamo intitolato questa edizione del festival La nuova stagione. E se c'è un simbolo che incarna in qualche modo la nuova stagione, anche se incarna forse non è il termine più adatto, è un po' infelice, comunque che rappresenta la nuova stagione, sono senz'altro i semi che garantiscono il protrarsi della vita attraverso le generazioni e quindi la rinascita nelle nuove stagioni, il protrarsi della vita nel tempo. E quindi sono un tesoro da conservare con cura. E allora siamo lieti di avere questa mattina in collegamento il coordinatore della più grande banca dei semi del mondo, la Global Seed Vault alle isole Svalbard. È con noi Åsmund Asdal. Eccolo. Hi Åsmund.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for inviting me to this nice festival.
Thank you for accepting our invitation. Spero di aver pronunciato bene il suo nome, ma non preoccupatevi perché a pronunciare meglio il suo nome e l'inglese, a dialogare con lui, ci sarà Elisabetta Tola, che invito a salire sul palco, che probabilmente è sicuramente la persona più indicata a dialogare, a parlare di semi, perché lei è una giornalista scientifica, autrice di diversi saggi, lei è conduttrice di Radio Trescenza, che è media partner del festival, quindi un altro motivo per essere felici di averla qui, è appassionata di semi, se ne occupa da sempre e ha partecipato a diversi progetti europei e non solo. E tra le altre cose ha pubblicato nel 2020 per Codice un libro con Marco Boscolo che si intitola Semi ritrovati, viaggio alla scoperta della biodiversità. E biodiversità ovviamente sarà un'altra delle parole chiave di questo incontro. Allora io lascio il palco a Elisabetta e virtualmente a Åsmund, di nuovo la pronuncia, quindi dico the floor is yours. Ho imparato questa cosa l'altro giorno grazie a Elena Lodolini, che è la nostra interprete che vi accompagnerà. Grazie e buon ascolto.
Grazie Alberto, grazie Alberto Agliotti. Buongiorno a tutte e a tutti, benvenuti. Per chi volesse seguire la conversazione in italiano c'è la possibilità, lo avete visto, di prendere le cuffie. Io e Åsmund invece dialogheremo in inglese. Good morning Åsmund. I'm very pleased to meet you. Let's say in e-person at least, and to have this chance to chat with you. I'm particularly excited this morning because, as I told you before, seeds have been one of the main interests of my professional life for the last 10 years or so. So I'm very, very, very happy to be here and having this conversation with you this morning and with our audience. I'll just address them for a second in Italian and then we turn back to English, okay? Allora, io dialogherò con Åsmund, ma vorrei naturalmente che fosse una conversazione aperta anche a voi, quindi gli farò un po' di domande, ma poi ci sarà spazio per le vostre domande o commenti, anche perché la storia della Global Seed Vault e in generale del percorso di conservazione dei semi è una storia veramente affascinante con moltissimi aspetti che possiamo appunto toccare e quindi sarei veramente contenta se anche da parte vostra ci fossero domande e commenti da porre al nostro ospite. Torno all'inglese. Åsmund, I think it's extremely important to know what's the temperature at the moment around the Global Seed Vault.
I think it is just above zero, between around 5 degrees, I should guess.
Okay,
but
so
I am not in Svalbard just now. I have my office on Norway mainland, and so I don't feel the temperature at the seed vault continuously.
Okay. It's just because temperature is one of the key features why the place and that location was chosen to build the Global Seed Vault. So can we start from, let's say, the beginning, Åsmund? What was the inception, the idea that brought to build the Global Seed Vault, and how this entire story began?
Yes, it started already in early 1980s, actually, because the Nordic Gene Bank, a regional gene bank for all Nordic countries, having a Nordic seed collection, Nordgen, the Nordic Gene Bank was looking for a safe place to store copies of the Nordic seed collection. And they explored and investigated several options, and the best option turned out to be having the seeds in an abandoned coal mine in permafrost in Svalbard. Even if the temperature now is just above zero, and the temperature in the mountain massives is below zero, between 3 and 4 degrees, I should guess. And in 1984, the Nordic Gene Bank put a steel container into this coal mine and brought copies of the Nordic seed collection into this permafrost storage in the coal mine. And this solution for securing genetic resources of plants gained a lot of international attention. And quite soon after that, discussion started to explore, would it be possible to build seed storage for copies of gene bank collections from all over the world in Svalbard. This idea was explored, discussed in FAO, in different fora. And I think in 2004, after the International Treaty for Plant Genetic Resources were negotiated, Norway was asked, would it be possible to build a seed storage for copies of gene bank collections from all gene banks all over the world in Svalbard? And Norway accepted to do so, and the seed vault was built in 2007 and opened in 2008. And at the moment, actually 13 years after the opening, almost 90 gene banks have taken advantage of this option and stored copies of their seed collections in the seed vault.
Right, so I think it's extremely important to remember that the first gene bank, the first seed bank it's almost 100 years old, and it was built by Nikolaj Vavilov, the Russian geneticist. I'm very, very close to this person in terms of his history, and he was the one who inspired me to start working on seeds, and that's why I want to remember this amazing scientist who was actually then betrayed by politics, and he ended up being imprisoned and died actually of starvation, which is amazingly sad, thinking of his entire life being devoted to actually save people from hunger by studying seeds and finding ways to collect and to preserve genetic biodiversity. Åsmund, I think that was the first example, but then in fact throughout the 20th century there was a long time where seed banks were not the focus, let's say, of a big international effort. We can say more or less maybe from the 70s on, right? There was a wider interest and attention to the idea of preserving genetic resources. Why it's so important, I mean, to make sure that we don't lose genetic variability and genetic diversity?
Well, if you take it from the beginning, you don't find the plants that we eat and the plants that we cultivate in agriculture. You do not find these plants in nature, but you do find the genes in the wild plants that were the predecessors of these cultivated plants. So it's still the same today. We do not have access to all cultivated plants in nature, not even in agriculture. A lot of of cultivated plants, varieties that we used to grow in former years. They have been abandoned by farmers, and they now exist only in gene banks. So actually the genetic resources that we find in gene banks and also in wild plants that are related to cropped plants, still you can find these in the nature, but this pool of genetic diversity is actually the raw material for breeders, for scientists, for farmers to cope with climate change, to deal with the demand for increased food production. So this is the raw material and the resources we need for securing food supplies in the future. So that's why gene banks takes care of this, conserve these genetic resources, and make the resources available to in the first place, plant breeders and scientists.
So the story of the Global Seed Vault, it's also a very important story of science diplomacy in a way, of cooperation and collaboration between countries and between regions of the world. Can you tell us a little bit more now, where are these resources coming from? How many countries are taking advantage or using the Global Seed Vault? And what's the mechanism? Because it's not like just your usual gene bank. It's a different type of effort. Is that right?
Yes, it's important to stress that the Seed Vault in Svalbard is not a regular gene bank. It's actually basically just a storage for conserving copies of seed samples that are conserved in gene banks. So
it's like a backup, Åsmund. It's like a backup copy.
It's a backup. So I want to compliment the regular gene banks for the work they do. They provide seeds and genetic resources for science and for plant breeders. They multiply the varieties and the genotypes when it's needed. The Seed Vault it's like a backup, as you said. It's a bank box where gene banks can store copies of their seeds, and if they lose their seeds in their primary collections at home, they can have the seeds back from their bank box in Svalbard, so to speak.
I think it's very important to share one example of this, because we had already a big example that links to the history of Syria, right? And the war and the bank that was in Aleppo, that was one of the most important banks in the Middle Eastern part of the world. Can you tell us a little bit more what happened there?
Yes, ICARA is not only an important bank for Middle East and this region, it's a globally important gene bank. We have around 10 such international centers having gene banks with huge amounts of genetic resources and genetic variation. And ICARA is devoted for, the abbreviation stands for the International Center of Agricultural Research in Dry Areas. And they kept very important collections of for instance, cereals and legumes, and they had headquarters and gene bank in Aleppo in Syria. And luckily, they deposited copies of their collections in the Seed Vault between 2008 and 2014. So more than 116,000 samples of seeds were deposited in the bank box in Svalbard. And when they realized in 2015 that their collections in Aleppo were no longer accessible and could no longer be used, the scientists have to flee to neighboring countries, and the seeds slowly were destroyed and lost germination ability and were not able to access them. They demanded the seeds from Svalbard to be returned, and not to Syria, but to ICARA units they already had in Lebanon and in Morocco. So during the years 2015 and until 2019, we returned all these 116,000 samples to these two ICARA units in Lebanon and Morocco. And luckily, all seed samples germinated. ICARDA was able to multiply the seeds. They were able to establish a new gene bank. They were able to send these seeds and genetic resources to plant breeders and researchers. And already now they have been able to send more than 90,000 samples back to the seed vault. So they are close to finalized by multiplying, establishing the new gene banks and depositing copies in the seed vault already. And this is a wonderful example of the importance of having a facility like the seed vault. So a sad story for Aleppo and for Syria and for ICARDA also, but it really shows the importance of the seed vault. And we're very happy to be able to return the seeds to the establishment of new ICARDA gene banks.
In a certain way, Åsmund, we could say that it shows also the importance of having redundancy of resources, right? So to have them stored in more than one place and to have them stored, of course, in the Global Seed Vault, but also in local regional banks. And redundancy is one of the key features also in nature, right? To actually preserve biodiversity. So can you tell us a little bit more about the germination issue? Because one of the things is, of course, we know we're going to store the seeds in the banks. How long are they going to be alive, or how long are they going to be functioning? And I know you just started a new project really focusing on that. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, the question about how long seeds can stay alive is a very crucial question for gene banks, of course. At the seed vault, we do not test the seeds, but the routines and the system is that the regular gene banks that deposited samples in the seed vault, they have the bulk samples at home in their own gene bank. And gene banks have routines for regular germination tests of their seeds. And when they see that the seeds they have in their own gene bank need to be renewed, multiplied again, they also know that the seeds in the seed vault has to be replaced by new fresh samples. So when they multiply seeds for their own use, for their own primary collection, they also send new sample to the seed vault. So that's a system how to assure that the seeds in the seed vault are alive and really have some value. So to the question about how long can seeds stay alive, and that is very hard to tell because it depends on a lot of factors. The seed quality is crucial. If the seeds were produced in a bad year, heavy rain, cold season, pests and diseases affecting the seed quality, the longevity of the seeds will be quite short. But if the summer is warm, weather is dry, and the seeds ripe properly, then we have seeds of good quality that can stay alive much longer than the poor seeds can. And then it comes to the preparation of the seed samples. It's very important for keeping seeds alive in frozen conditions as they are in gene banks, that the seeds are dried to a very low moisture content, and that they are packed properly in airtight bags, pouches, envelopes. And if the seeds are of good quality and they are packed properly, dried properly, they can stay alive for a very long time. But again, another factor is the species. Some species can have seeds staying alive for perhaps 1,000 years. Some cereals can stay alive for 500 years, and some other plants can stay alive for just 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So this is a very difficult question to respond to precisely. So our experiment, we have one experiment in the coal mine where it's not a very scientific sound project, but it's a kind of monitoring project for following the germination percentage in the seeds that we have in the Nordic collection in the coal mine. So this has been going on since 1986, and we published a report after 30 years a couple of years ago, and we have some results. Again, the results are restricted to these crops, to the quality of the seeds that was present when we put these seeds into the seed vault. But if you're asking me about the new experiment in the seed vault, we are establishing again what we call a 100-year experiment. We are producing seeds of 14 globally important crops. We are producing 5 seeds of 5 different varieties of each crop, because there are intraspecific diversity and differences in germination within a species, making this question even more complicated. We are also producing seeds over 3 different years, so we can include the difference between seed quality from year to year. And we are collaborating with gene banks in Brazil, Philippines, India, Portugal, and Germany. They are producing the seeds over these 3 years. We are preparing these seeds exactly the same way at our Nordic Genetic Resource Center's lab, packing them and bringing them into the seed vault, and we will test the seeds every 10 years. So I have to stay in this position for 100 years more to really be able to respond to your request, your questions.
We'll see in 100 years, more or less. And of course, there is also a question, might sound silly, but it is when we look into long-term, into the future, how to proper train people to make sure that this experiment goes ahead, and that there are data and evidences that are collected throughout this long time that are really used to look properly and compare properly in the long term. So it's also a question of training and studying and making sure that the future scientists will be involved as properly, right? I'm sure that that's also part of the experiment.
Yes, of course. So we are making thoroughly reports and records of all data about the seed production, the handling of seeds, so that scientists in the future will be able to discuss and consider the results, and hopefully we will give some important knowledge to gene banks, because this is an important question also for them, because they can save money if they know exactly or more about how long their seeds can stay alive, and when they have to test them, and when they have to multiply and refresh their gene bank samples.
Right. So when I was doing my research for the book and the web documentary I did on different efforts around the world to preserve seeds or to deal with genetic resources, I was the original seed bank built by Vavilov in St. Petersburg back in 2012. And actually also visited one of the experimental stations, because Vavilov had this intuition that it wasn't sufficient to have a seed vault, but you also had to have experimental station in different climate and different soils in order to make sure that these seeds were also tested in different situations. And we can see that this kind of sensibility is spreading around the world today. There are lots of countries that are trying really hard to bring forward this effort. I just want to mention one case because there is a country that is currently going through a very difficult time of a conflict, which is Ethiopia. But Ethiopia has one of the most important seed banks in Africa. I think it's the first one in terms of accession. It's about 75,000 accession, more or less. And they also promoted, the National Institute promoted also around 30 community seed banks to make sure that farmers were involved in this effort of preserving seed, bringing them back to the field, and also making sure that they are able to store enough seeds in case something happens. And that's my question, Åsmund, that we have to be very sure that the seed banks are not solving the problem of a lost harvest for the next year, right? We don't have enough seed in the seed banks to actually make sure that we go back to the field the next year and we have enough to plant, right? But they do preserve the genetic material that we need to do the research and to multiply then to be able to continue. Is that right? We have to be very careful not to think that when we look at the Global Seed Vault, people go there, take seed and put them back into the field. Sometimes the perception is that.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. At the Seed Vault, we conserve around between 300 and 500 seeds of each accession. So this is just enough to preserve the genetic resources, the genetic variation of a genotype or a plant variety. So, and it's also important to stress that the seeds in the Seed Vault are the property of the gene banks that sent the seeds there. So we do not send seeds to anyone else but the owner of the seeds, which is the gene banks. So if a breeder or researcher or even a farmer wants seed samples of a certain variety, he has to approach the gene bank that own the material. And these gene banks that deposit seeds in the Seed Vault, they have kind of guaranteed that the genetic resources are available for plant breeding and farming, and they will provide material from their own gene bank stocks. But you have a very important point that there is a kind of missing link between gene banks and science and plant breeding and the farmers' needs for seeds. So I know that many places in the world they are establishing so-called community gene banks, which is set up for producing bigger amounts of seeds and will be able to provide seed samples to farmers that need still quite small samples, but still they will not spend 10 years to multiply the seed they need for just sowing, so they can more rapidly be able to produce these crops and these varieties for real food production. So all efforts that can make these seeds available for farmers is highly welcomed.
Yeah, it's a system that we hope it will multiply in a way. I know in Italy there are a number of community seed banks, in France, in Spain, but also in many other continents. I visited a few of them in some African countries, and it's extremely interesting to see how they link to the Biodiversity Institute then for the research part. So I have at least other 10 questions for Åsmund, but I don't want also to take the time, and I know that people in the hall might have questions. So I will also open the floor to questions. I will take maybe 2 or 3 first, and I think there is a microphone. You can ask questions in Italian or English, whatever, because we can translate them to Åsmund. So just a second. There is one question here, I see already. Qui davanti.
Grazie, faccio la domanda in italiano. La propagazione delle piante arboree generalmente non è da seme e volevo sapere se comunque, siccome ha comunque un'importanza la conservazione e il miglioramento da seme, se ci sono anche piante arboree come appunto le piante da frutto, quindi tutte quelle che sono piante arboree coltivate.
Ok, forse ne raccolgo un'altra, una o due, così poi facciamo dare la risposta, se ce ne sono, ci sono altre, qua davanti, Stefano. I'm collecting two questions, Åsmund, and then we'll turn.
So first of all, thanks a lot for being here with us. My question is regarding algae, since some of them are part of plants as well. So how you're going to cope with that biodiversity as well? Thanks.
Okay, so the first question was on trees and fruit trees in particular, in general, plants that are not normally reproduced through seeds, but she was asking if you're also conserving seeds of fruit trees and tree species or other plant species that are not generally propagated through seeds, but still this very, very important for agriculture and for forestry. So how they are preserved in the Global Seed Vault. And Stefano, you heard the question, so it's algae. So we go from trees to algae because we only focus on seeds up to now.
Yes, the seed vault is conserving seeds only. And what we call orthodox seeds are seeds that can be dried to a very low moisture contents, and they can stand freezing. So there are several species, trees, particularly tropical trees. They are not producing what we call orthodox seeds. You cannot dry a coconut and freeze it. It will certainly die. So these species has to be conserved by other methods than by conserving seeds. And fruit trees, for instance, tropical trees, for instance, they are conserved in field gene banks where you keep the living plants in field. And this is also the case for algae. These are not conserved at the seed vault. And luckily, there are other programs. There are other methods of conserving genetic resources. Seeds is a very cheap way of storing genetic resources. You have to allocate more resources, more sophisticated technologies, or quite expensive fields collections to conserve other kinds of genetic material from organisms important for us. But and luckily new methods are developed, but so far the seed vault do only conserve seed samples. I could also say that some fruit trees produce orthodox seeds. Apples, for instance, as you may know, apple varieties are produced by grafting. They produce seeds, but if you sow a seed from an apple, you will get what at least we in Norway call a wild genotype, and produce apples that are not the same variety as the apple you perhaps wanted to multiply. But the genetic material in apples are conserved in a seed, apple seed, but the combination is different. So we can conserve apple seeds, but we cannot conserve the species, the varieties we want to conserve. Varieties of apples and other fruit trees are conserved in field gene banks, but we can conserve the genes in other combinations in seeds in the seed vault.
Ci sono altre domande? Abbiamo ancora tempo? Ok. There are a couple of more questions, Åsmund. I'm just taking them.
Sì, scusa. Buongiorno. Pongo la domanda in italiano che mi viene sicuramente molto più facile. Vorrei fare un inciso più che altro, più che una domanda, che è questa. Prima è stato detto che anche qui in Europa, in Italia, in Francia, forse più in Francia, ci sono delle banche dati in cui ci sono questi semi che possono essere messi a disposizione direttamente agli agricoltori. Io vorrei fare un inciso che nell'opinione comune può essere questo, ma nella realtà dei fatti non è esattamente questo. quindi cioè, non è che la banca dati dà direttamente agli agricoltori la disposizione. Beh no, ci sono dei passaggi intermedi.
No, ci sono delle banche comunitarie di semi che sono formate da cooperative di agricoltori. Ne ho visitate un certo numero e danno direttamente i semi agli agricoltori. Dipende da com'è la costituzione di quella banca. Non è una banca, non è un istituto di ricerca, sono banche collettive. Posso garantire che esistono, ci sono. Certo, per la coltivazione, sì, sì. Un'altra domanda?
Io volevo chiedere, ma il riscaldamento globale sta avendo oppure avrà qualche impatto sul Global Seed Vault oppure su altre strutture che comunque si servono di basse temperature?
Okay, so this was one of the questions I also had on the list, so thank you for bringing it up, which is why is climate change, actually even the extreme events we're going through in the last few years that we know are not maybe each one of them, but in general associated with the climatic crisis. Is that worrisome somehow, or is that affecting or might affect the safety of the Global Seed Vault and also the process you have to go through to make sure that that genetic material is actually kept in the long term? We've seen extreme temperature in places where we didn't expect to see them in the last few years. So is that a worry for you?
Climate change is a worry for everyone, but it's important to know that the seed vault is artificially cooled. The permafrost in the mountains in Svalbard provide perhaps -3, -4 degrees. If the climate change continue as it looks like now, permafrost in the mountain will perhaps disappear in 100 years from now. But still, the seed vault is artificially cooled down to -18 degrees. Permafrost provides -3, -4, but optimal conditions for storing seeds is -18. So we cool the seed vault by electricity cooling systems down to -18. And if temperatures rise, we have to use a bit more electricity to cool it down to the correct temperature. You may also have heard that there were some problems with the seed and with water intrusions in the tunnel of the seed vault some years ago. Luckily, the Norwegian government allocated resources to deal with that. So in 2018 and 19, the old tunnel was completely removed and a new tunnel was constructed. It costed actually 20 million euros to construct a tunnel using technology that are used offshore for oil drilling. So it's completely watertight now, and we are quite confident that the seeds are 100% safe. And in addition, we, as I said, spend electricity to cool it down to keep it frozen also in the future. And it's also important to know that Svalbard will still be a cold place, even if climate change is affecting the Arctic quite heavily. So Svalbard will still be a cold place and a suitable place for conserving seeds.
Ok, ci sono altre domande? Because I have one more question for you, Åsmund, maybe, and then if there are some more from the floor, from the audience, which has to do less with the process of the Svalbard Seed Vault, but more with the way the banks collect their seeds and then they bring their copy to you, which is the prospection, the importance of the prospection work and the fact of looking for example, wild relatives and variety and so on, right? So I think also in view of the climate impact, we need really to have the broadest variety of G material that we can use. So, and there are lots of stories about the exploration that, for example, Vavilov and other people during the entire 20th century did in looking for plant varieties. Is this still now an important part of the process? Keep looking and researching new varieties, or wild relatives or other type of crops that we could use in terms of genetic material to improve or to breed new varieties to be more adapt for example, future conditions?
Yes, absolutely. So in the seed vault just now, it's more than 5,000 species represented. The genetic diversity of almost 6,000 species are conserved there. Gene banks still make collecting expeditions to collect samples from farmers and also from crop wild relatives they can find in the wild. And it's quite amazing that the seed vault has been quite an iconic symbol of the importance of taking care of genetic resources. And I quite frequently receive emails and phone calls from persons that have genetic material, old varieties of vegetables, for instance. Please, Åsmund, I don't know what will be the destiny of my seeds, of my variety. Can you assist in taking care of these important, valuable seeds? And I have to say that we only conserve copies of seeds that are conserved in gene banks, but I can guide them to local and national, regional gene banks that can assist them in collecting their varieties in the first place. And when they have included these samples in their own collections, they can produce and send copies also to the seed vault. So I think the seed vault has increased the public attention to conserving genetic resources, and that is a kind of side effect of the seed vault that we are very happy about.
I think this is particularly important and true in terms of the fact that many people didn't even know of the existence of seed banks. How many are the seed banks that are registered officially around the world, more or less, Åsmund?
Actually,
I know it's very difficult. Yeah.
A difficult question. FAO actually have a list of 1,700 different institutes and organizations that have seed collections with genetic diversity. We believe that our aim is to conserve just unique samples. So many of these gene banks have copies of each other's collections, and FAO estimates that around 2.2 million samples are unique. And we, as far as we consider, if we have copies of the collections of the 200 most important gene bank collection, we would more or less have the genetic diversity that are known at the moment. But still, gene banks collect more from farmers, from plant breeding, from the wild. So this number will increase. And I'm also happy to say that in the seed vault, we can store 4.5 million samples of seeds. So we have plenty of space. So we hope that gene banks continue to collect seeds to increase the diversity of their collections and also deposit copies at the seed vault.
So it's an endless piece of work. I think we've reached our time, I think, more or less. I don't know if there is one last question maybe we can take. Francesco.
This is just a curiosity, which is not actually related to biology. But I wonder if you can tell me what are the primary energy sources you use to generate the electricity that is, you use to cool down the seed vault? Just a curiosity.
Yes, it's actually a quite relevant question just now, because you may know that Longyearbyen and Svalbard has for 100 years been a coal producing island. So the settlements in Svalbard in the first place were established to produce coal from the huge coal layers there. But due to, so at the moment, the power plants in Longyearbyen in Svalbard is supplied by local produced coal. But due to, as we all know, due to environmental priorities and policies just now, the Norwegian government has decided to end all coal production in Svalbard in 2023. So I think quite significant projects are carried out just now to explore options and alternatives to providing electricity to the power plant in Svalbard and to the seed vault. So hopefully we will come up with some more environmental friendly solutions in the future.
Right, so with our eyes and ears and mind in the future, we will keep following the story of the Svalbard Seed Vault in the next years and decades to come. And thank you so much, Åsmund Asdal, for being with us today.
It has been a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
It was an honor and a pleasure, and of course, thank you to all of you for being here and also interacting with us. And have a good day. Una buona giornata a tutti. Thank you, Åsmund, again. Good luck and good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a nice day. Good luck to your festival.